With all of these large companies, large valuations, why haven't they gone public? Why haven't we seen Facebook and Zynga? Actually, I know Zynga were waiting pretty quickly. We're expecting an IPO to launch, but why haven't they gone sooner? Why aren't we seeing more IPOs?
Right.
Why are they waiting longer?
A couple things. One, there's a lot of money available privately. So if you can raise, we led a round of funding for a company called Buddy Media this summer. It was a $54 million financing round. 15 years ago, it would have been pretty hard to raise $50 million in a private financing. There just wasn't enough money available to do that. So you've seen investors come in who are willing to invest in great growth stage companies, and there's a lot of capital available from firms like ours, DST, Tiger Global, TCV, GA. There's lots of money available to these companies privately. So they can raise hundreds of millions of dollars if they need to and stay private, which you used to only be able to do as a public company. I think secondly, a lot of these entrepreneurs enjoy being private. They enjoy having a small board, a small group of shareholders, being able to move, shake, spend money where they need to, change direction, do the things that you need to do to be a successful high-growth company. That it's just harder to do when you're a public company. So I wouldn't say that they're all never going to go public. I don't think they will be SAS or Cargill, but they're just taking their time and saying, hey, if I can raise a few $100 million privately and put off being public for a few years, that's terrific. Thirdly, you're seeing the advent of these secondary exchanges where employees can sell shares, shareholders can sell shares. So there's one of the reasons people used to go public was to give liquidity to employees and shareholders. And now you've got these markets cropping up where there is a little bit of that liquidity, and so I think that solves some of the pressure. On the flip side of that, I would still argue, and I know the NBCA is arguing, we need to find a way to get more companies public. Back in the 90s, even before the bubble, we had 400 or 500 companies going public per year. Today we're averaging about 100 or 150. Last year was the first time in history that China has had more IPOs than the US.
Wow.
Right? What happens after a company goes public? They have capital in the bank, they're going to be around for 5 to 10 years, they start to hire people. They've been hiring, but they hire on a more long-term plan. So it's good for our economy to have public companies, and I would love to see more public companies, but there's a pretty rational reason as to why some of these companies are waiting.
And that's what Steve Case, AOL's former chairman and CEO Steve Case, was actually saying that we do need to see more IPOs in order to put more people to work. I mean, The only thing that I was hearing from Mark Benioff, CEO of Salesforce, that we have plenty of jobs here in Silicon Valley.
Right.
So I'm not sure IPOs, it's the who's right? I mean, do we need more IPOs for more jobs here in Silicon Valley? Not necessarily. But who are the companies that are more likely to IPO? It's going to be these technology companies versus companies in the Midwest and Iowa and Nebraska where we do need those jobs. So I'm not convinced of Steve Case's point there that more IPOs is certainly going to solve the problem, because I think most of the IPOs will be in technology out here in Silicon Valley.
Right. I think broadly, and I wasn't here for your conversation with Steve, but broadly the concept, if we have more IPOs, some percentage of them would be outside of Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley probably gets disproportionately benefited.
Yeah.
But I believe that to get bigger job creation, we've got to find ways to put the startup capital into other parts of the country. How do we replicate the Silicon Valley model that we're seeing in New York and Chicago and Seattle and Austin? How do we get that into other markets throughout the U.S.? To me, if I were in charge for a day, I wouldn't be focusing on stimulus packages that reduce, the increased road spending. I would be focused on things that create new companies. How do we create new companies in other parts of the country?
The federal government has been facing some incredibly harsh criticism from taxpayers and such for investing in green technologies such as Solyndra. I mean, you have to take risk in order to ultimately benefit in the future, whether or not people agree with it. Why not, instead of investing in one large one like that, why don't they go on a road show and invest in middle America?
It's a great question. I don't know the answer.
I think it's a good question.
I'm not in charge.
Valley.
I said if I was in charge, but I'm not in charge. I think the other thing you have to kind of think about is a lot of what government has been focused on are sort of traditional methods. So they'll say, we'll give you a tax credit if you hire people. If you read the McKinsey report that's here at the conference, it says that 50% of small business owners say a tax credit doesn't affect their desire to hire somebody. It's a short term. I can't hire you if all I get is a benefit for this year, because I know you're going to be around next year, and then I don't have that tax credit. So I think government's got to take a step back and leverage some of the lessons learned in Silicon Valley, if you will, and say, what's worked there? Why do we have low unemployment? Why do we have high wages? Why do we have people making lots of money from stock options and a thriving? Now, the flip side of it is we have a relatively pricey housing market, but why do we have that in Silicon Valley? And what could we take that's worked there and replicate in other parts of the country? And I don't think we can just keep going back to the old models of tax credits and we'll hire more people to build roads. I mean, those things clearly have not worked, and government's got to think different.